Hi, IWF sisters. We're here today with the phenomenal President, Congresswoman, Chancellor, President, Secretary, and IWF sister, Donna Shalala. Welcome, Donna. Great
You're
to see
welcome.
you. Thank you for being here. Let's start with you telling us a little bit of your journey from Ohio to South Florida. I know it was a very adventurous journey.
It was, but I should point out that my grandparents lived the other side of the family lived in Coral Gables. So as a kid, we came down almost every Christmas. I remember driving down until until I went to college, and then it was sort of every other Christmas.
Oh, so you always had a connection then to South Florida.
I did. I had grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins that were down here. A couple of cousins of mine went to Coral Gables High School, as a matter of fact.
Wow. Well, that's how we got you down here then. I was
Yeah.
always wondering about that. Well, tell us about your journey. I know you served in the Peace Corps after college, and not an easy place to serve. Tell us about your journey from college to president of the University of Miami. And don't skip University of Wisconsin because that's my undergrad. So go Badgers.
Yeah, I ran into a couple of Badgers yesterday in New York City. They came running up to remind me that they had been there when I was chancellor.
Yep, you're still
You
chancellor to
know,
me.
I've never had grand plans. I remember my senior year of college, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And so I applied to law school, I applied to medical school, I applied to graduate school, I applied to the Peace Corps. And I got all these acceptances and I sort of laid them out on my bed at college and said, what would be the greatest adventure? And it was clearly the Peace Corps. And that's how I got into the Peace Corps. I could have been a lawyer.
Yeah.
But I decided to go on the great adventure that was Peace Corps, and I was one of the first Peace Corps volunteers. They weren't very well organized, which was an advantage. And I went off to Iran, living in a mud village in southern Iran, helping to build a small agricultural college, teaching at the medical college in the city of Ahwaz. Living pretty rough, without electricity, without running water. We slept on the roofs. It was a desert, and it was just stunning to open your eyes and see the stars so close. But it was a wonderful adventure. And after that, I sort of traveled the world, and my parents thought I was a flower child. And I finally came back, actually, to go to graduate school. I had a boyfriend who was going to graduate school at Syracuse, so I sort of followed him aimlessly without any idea that I really wanted to go to graduate school. I really wanted to be a journalist, but they weren't hiring at the time. I had worked at the Cleveland Press during the summers that I was in college. So he hated it. I loved it. I ended up with a PhD, but I still wanted to be a journalist. So I wrote to the Times and to the Washington Post, but they weren't hiring. They said, go back to Cleveland and work for the Cleveland Press. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. So my major professor found me a job in New York at Columbia. And the rest is sort of history. I mean, I became an academic, served 4 years in the Carter administration as the assistant secretary for HUD, did not go back to Columbia. I went to Hunter as a very rookie president, just because someone called me and said their search had blown up and they thought I'd be perfect for it. And I pointed out I had never been a dean, I had never been a provost, and they didn't care as long as I was a tenured professor and tenurable. And from there, I loved Hunter. I loved living in New York. From there, I went off to the University of Wisconsin. I was recruited by the big public universities on a routine basis while I was at Hunter, Michigan, Wisconsin, Texas. But I ended up at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, which is an extraordinary institution. It's a world class, very happily ensconced in Madison, Wisconsin. when Bill Clinton got elected, and I had known Bill and Hillary since my days in New York. We had mutual friends. Hillary and I sat on the board of the Children's Defense Fund for almost 15 years, I think. And, you know, he invited me to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So I went back to Washington somewhat reluctantly because I loved the job at Wisconsin. I could have been there forever. And as everyone knows, I spent 8 years there, not ever being in a hurry to get out. And then Miami came calling. I had an old friend, Mary Doyle, who was dean of the law school, and she kept talking about me to the trustees. And so I got into the mix of the search and ended up coming to Miami, which is where I had family. And in between time, I sat on boards and did all sorts of things, traveled the world, climbed in the Himalayas.
Oh, and did an excellent job also at the University of Miami, and we're glad you're here. Are you splitting your time still between Miami and New York? Because I saw
Yeah,
you.
I'm the interim president at the New School, which is a very distinguished university in New York with a long history of helping initially Jewish exiles that were escaping World War II. Hannah Arendt, a whole set of Jewish intellectuals. But that's just a short-term assignment. I'm really a resident here. While I was in New York, of course, I was president of the Women's Forum of New York. I was a founder of the International Women's Forum. I've been involved with the Women's Forum, IWF, for since 1980, I think, since the beginning of it.
We're
I
celebrating.
knew Ellie Guggenheimer, and I was probably taken in the second year.
Yeah, we're celebrating our 50th year coming up of IWF. Tell us about that. Tell us about the beginning of IWF and why you thought it was an important organization, assuming you did.
Yeah, I mean, Ellie Guggenheimer had a dream and she kept it simple. All we did was initially have lunch, and eventually we had a lot more programming, but it was an attempt to identify women leaders in a community. And it was a network, a powerful network in New York City in particular. I met women in the business community, in finance, in publishing, all the great industries of New York. And out of that spun out the IWF in cities across the country. We actually started, you know, Dallas and LA and Chicago and eventually Miami came in. I was a member of the Women's Forum in New York, in Washington, D.C., and in Madison, Wisconsin, and then finally in Miami.
Well, we're happy to have you part of ours now. So you said right now you're interim president at New School. Tell us about what you're doing there and what else you're working on right now.
Well, their president left early, so they approached me about the possibility of coming to New York for a very short period of time. And we're talking about 6 or 7 months. I hope not longer than that. And I'm kind of commuting back to Miami. I'm not going to give up my residency here. I'm working with a number of colleagues here on getting abortion on the ballot next fall. So I'm helping to raise money with a number of the other organizations. And we have our own PAC that's bipartisan because we think it's very concerning that that state legislature wants to interfere with our rights. And this is about freedom and about avoiding governmental interference in fundamental rights. So I'm working on that. I took a leave of absence from the Underline board, which I love. I adore Meg Daly and everything that they're doing. So I haven't been active down here during this period when I'm commuting to New York.
Well, it still sounds like you have a lot going on. Do you want to mention the PAC that you're supporting so that people can hear about it?
Yeah, but remember, we never wanted IWF to be too involved in pure politics, and
Great.
so people can get in touch with us. Anna Hochmeyer, from the vice chair of the city of Pinecrest, is actually the head of this particular PAC. And anyone that wants to get in touch with us can just email me and I'll give them all the information.
Sounds great. Thank
But I want to be very careful with the International Women's Forum because we have been so careful not to take positions, even though the vast majority of members agree that there shouldn't be government interference.
Yeah, that's been a tricky issue with
Yes,
IWF.
exactly.
Well, you've done so much in your career. Tell us, is there a
into a world-class research university, recently accepted into the AAU, the prestigious organization of the best universities in the country. But I'm proud of the students whose lives I've touched. I always taught while I was at UM. I still teach at UM, even though I'm in New York. I'll finish up one of the MBA classes with one of my colleagues, Alex Azar, who was also a HHS secretary for the MBA program. And you count the number of lives you've touched, whether it's been through public policy or in the classroom. I constantly run into people. In New York on the street the other day, a student that took my course that was at the university, she graduated in 2006, she said. And she said, my course changed her life. And she went into public health as a result of taking my course. And now she's an executive in a health organization. So, it's not individual jobs, it's individual lives for me.
And I'm happy you mentioned that, because I want to talk about what advice you're giving now to young people. And would it be different advice you would give to your younger self?
No.
So what is the advice then that you're giving now?
Most people ask me how you get to make policy, and my answer is you have to understand people's lives. For any profession that you want to practice, where you're interacting with people or trying to help people, you have to understand their lives. You can't just read books or statistics. You have to understand people's lives. If you want to be a world-class real estate person, you have to understand people's lives. And that's the fundamental piece. I tell people to listen. And I tell young people never to have lunch at their desks. Always either brown bag it with someone that they've met. Always be networking. That's what makes a difference in a career.
And let's go the other way. Did you have a particular mentor in your life that influenced you?
No, I had a lot of mentors at different stages. In graduate school, in my first jobs, in government, at least initially in government. So I never had one mentor as such. But as I moved around, I was helped by an enormous number of people for whom I'm always going to be grateful, but they expected me to pass it on. I've never been part of that queen bee syndrome, in which I've said to young people, you just have to work hard. I've always felt a responsibility to reach out and pull people up at the same time.
What's the best advice you ever received?
Never have lunch at your desk. Network.
Great.
Make friends.
Great advice.
And keep in touch. Keep in touch with people. Someone asked me the other day, how did you ever get in the president's cabinet? I said, look around the room, figure out which one of your friends is going to run for president and keep in touch for 30 years. I mean, I met the Clintons so long ago and we just kept in touch.
Yeah.
It worked out.
Well, it sounds like you had kept in touch with a lot of people, so you had many choices. What is just a couple fun questions. What is a fact about you we wouldn't find on the internet?
Oh, I
And
flew
a lot about you on the internet.
yeah, let's see. When I was 9 years old, I played for a softball team that won the city championship, and our coach was the legendary George Steinbrenner, who eventually went on to buy the New York Yankees.
Wow, how did you get him as a coach?
He was the playground director at the playground when he was a college student.
Wow, that's a great fact. Tell us about a memorable or your most memorable adventure that's not professional related.
Oh, I think traversing the Himalayas, going across the Bhakto Glacier in Kashmir, walking from Srinagar to Leh across northern India. 6 weeks it took.
Wow.
And that was just a magnificent adventure. More recently, I've been in the Antarctica, and that too was an adventure. Not as isolated because there were so many people around as trekking in the Himalayas.
Why were there so many people at the Antarctica?
Oh, because we were on a boat.
Oh, okay.
No, it was an organized tour as opposed to taking some helpers along and trekking with a handful of people.
When did you track the Himalayas? What year was that?
Well, I did for almost a decade in the 1980s.
Wow. Okay. Last two fun questions. What book or podcast are you recommending now?
Well, I just went to a book party for the 50th anniversary of Ms. Magazine. And
Wow.
Knopf has published a wonderful book with a lot of the famous articles out of Ms., which actually changed our world. And so I'm recommending to my friends the Ms. book. If you'll hold on a minute, I'll show it to you.
Okay.
And the great Gloria Steinem was at the book party.
Oh, great.
Oops. See it?
Yep. That's amazing.
It's a very big book.
Big
and thick, but everybody ought to get it.
Okay, well, that will be the recommendation. Are there any podcasts you listen to, or?
Well, most of the podcasts I listen to are related to health policy. They're technical.
So you wouldn't recommend them to the general public?
No.
Okay, last fun question. If you were in charge of the playlist, which song would be playing next?
Oh my God. I think let's see.
This is my fight.
That's a great one. This is my fight song.
It's also my ringtone.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a fight song. And the other one would be Roar, I think.
Oh, that's a great song as well. And it definitely lets us know where you are right now.
Yeah.
Still fighting the good fight. Well, I appreciate your time today. We try to keep these short, but I appreciate your time so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Hi to all my sisters in the IWF Miami.